This paper wants to ask exactly those two very simple research questions here. First, whether individuals will respond differently to those two schemes for designing a fundraising campaign, and if there is a difference that we find, which design feature is responsible for that difference. The methods we're going to use is an online donation experiment which we ran on mTurk, and the main result is going to be that the unit donation scheme is able to produce a different number of donors that give something, but overall it will raise the same amount of money for the charity. So the conclusion of this result is that a unit donation scheme can be a virtually costless option for a charity to exercise some control about the number of donors that will respond to their campaign. For example, for future targeting and other reasons that have been shown to be beneficial for them. We're not the first that use those kind of unit donations. They have been used in experiments before, and actually that's one reason why we went into studying that little difference here, because we also wanted to know what consequences are for researchers that use this kind of scheme in their experiments, in their donation experiments. And we're not aware so far that there's any controlled comparison between the two choice architectures in the literature so far. So by doing that, we contribute to the literature on ask design for donation campaigns, on framing issues in general, and also about the effects of providing information to donors about the unit price, or more generally about the effectiveness of a donation. So let me give you a flavor of the experimental design. A very simple experiment. What we mainly need for running such a kind of donation experiment is a charitable service or public good that is easily quantifiable, that you could easily put into units, right? There are many out there, and the one that we selected is the treatment of malnourished children into clinics that were run by a German charity at the time of the experiment. And why would we choose exactly this? Because it gave us a very neat cost of service that were easily parcelable, if there is a term like that. You know, you can parcel them into certain units that we need. The service cost about $15 US per month in order to feed one child. So we partitioned that for the sake of the experiments into two sizes of the units that the donors can choose. One was a weekly ration that would be able to feed one child for 1 week, and that would cost $3.50. It would require a donation of $3.50, and likewise a daily ration that the donors could fund for 50 US dollar cents. The treatments that we ran with this consisted of 3 treatments that represented pure forms of those 2 elicitation types. You see here the 3 dimensions at which the 2 schemes differ, and you see we ran one money donation treatment where the framing is in money, the choice that is completely unrestricted, there is no information about the provision cost given, and then we run 2 pure unit donation schemes that differ by the unit size that is going to be used, one with a large weekly unit for $3.50, and one treatment in which donors could fund numbers of the small daily rations. In order to find out which dimension is responsible for any difference, we also ran intermediate forms. For example, this info treatment where everything is as in a money donation scheme, but we also provide the information that 50 cents will feed one child for 1 day, for example, or $3.50 will feed it for 1 week, or the info plus frame where we actually allowed them to also donate half a ration or any fraction that they wanted to choose. You will notice that mathematically you would expect 6 treatments that combine those 3 dimensions. Why did we only choose 3 of them? Well, 2 of them doesn't make sense design-wise. That is because you cannot run something with a unit frame without giving the price. So that excludes 2 treatments. Another treatment would have been a treatment where we only restrict the choice while still asking for money and don't say anything about the marginal cost, about the price. And we thought about this, but decided that this would be a rather weird treatment where we were not sure what the respondents would actually, believe about why their choice is suddenly restricted for no obvious reason that we would give. These 3 intermediate treatments were run only with a large unit size for budgetary reasons. As I said, the experiments ran on mTurk in 2018. We gave them $7 for a task on mTurk where they completed an unrelated online survey, and that compensation of $7 then served as the endowment for a piggyback donation appeal that they encountered during the survey, and that they could use to give. In total, we collected 848 complete observations after some cleaning. So let me give you the results. What you see here is a comparison of the pure treatments for the likelihood of giving. So that is a dichotomous choice whether somebody actually gave anything or whether abstained from becoming a donor. You can see that in the money donation treatment, about half of all subjects decided to give anything. And this significantly drops to about 25% when the unit donations ask you how many weekly rations do you want to fund. In contrast, we have a significant increase in the likelihood of giving when we use the small unit donations. So there is something going on. The likelihood to give differs significantly, but the direction depends on the size of the unit and the price. This regression table basically repeats what I just said. You have this about 22% drop for the large units and about 13% increase. And you can see here that this doesn't really change even if we include some controls on that. The next table gives you an overview about the effect of the intermediate treatments of the certain dimensions already still with respect to the likelihood of giving. And what you can see here is that the actual dimension that drives this result is the fact that we restrict the choice set of subjects through switching from a money donation treatment to a unit donation treatment. Only giving the cost info doesn't do much. Changing the frame doesn't do much. There's also not a significant interaction effect between the framing and the restriction. So it's really the restriction of the choice that has an effect here. And if you think about it for a minute, that's what you would expect from a rational agent. Giving anything, becoming a donor is very cheap in a money treatment. You can just give a very tiny amount that will make you a donor, while in the treatment where you have to give at least one weekly ration at a cost of $3.50, it's very costly to become a donor. So this is exactly what you would expect, a decrease as I showed you here. With respect to overall giving, so mean donations, we do not see any significant change between the money donation and the unit donation schemes. And also for the intermediate treatments, there is nothing you know, there is not the case that any dimension introduces a change that is then offset by another dimension. There's just not much music going on. So overall donations are the same. So let me conclude for that. What we find in this paper is basically two results. The one is that the unit donation scheme affects the likelihood to give. It does, however, not affect the mean donations, the overall giving per subject. What we conclude from this is that the unit donation scheme can be an effective tool for charities to increase the donor base. For example, it had been shown that if you already have people in your address space and you retarget them, you can increase in giving by them. So charities may use this tool for future targeting. There's one subtlety going on that I haven't talked about much, and that is that we find that the direction of the effect depends on the unit size and the corresponding unit price, right? There is some strong suggestive evidence in our data why the likelihood to give actually increases for the small unit size while it decreases for the large unit size, as you would expect. But our treatments so far do not allow to pinpoint that on a controlled basis. Okay, so I think that was pretty quick. Thanks for for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes for questions. Hi everyone, I'm Paul, I'm the chair.
Nice to see you.
So yeah, I actually have a question. Should I just start?
Sure.
So how does your research actually relate to the research of earmarking? So when a charity offers earmarking, they hope that they receive more donations because people have the feeling that they can have more control where their money goes and so on, right? But in earmarking, you have normally the setting that people donate money and they can earmark it to a specific cause, right? But do people here in the unit donation scheme, might they not have also more the feeling that they have more control where their donation goes and hence also donate more?
That's actually what we considered to see, right? That what we almost expected maybe, because we were also thinking that maybe the change in the frame from how much money do you want to give to how many units do you want to provide may shift donors' focus to the impact of their donation. And you may know also the work on by, I don't know, for example, by Ottoni Wilhelm and others on impact motivation by Duncan, which has been shown to be one of the major motivations for giving. If people have the feeling that their donation actually makes a difference and has some impact. So we thought, that giving money is may shift your focus on the expenditures that you do, the sacrifice that you do, while unit donations actually, like earmarking, is more gives you more a feeling of that your donation does something. But that's what we do not see in our data. We do not see that framing itself has any perceivable effect in this case.
The money donation, was it clear to the donors that it will go to the charity and that it will be used for the meals? So it's kind of already earmarked?
Good call. Let me see. Let me show you the exact wordings. So here you find the two wordings of the treatments. On the left-hand side, you find the what we now call money donation. It's the expenditure donation here. your question was whether they were whether they had a strong information that it's going to be earmarked.
Yeah, if they have, I mean, for them it might even be important that they know where the money goes, right? So, I mean, there could be this difference between in a real world, I would think like, hey, people think like, if I donate money, they might use it for administrative cost and whatsoever. If I donate a unit, I have more the feeling it goes there directly. But here I see the wording and it actually says providing the nutritious food. So it seems more that for the participants, it could be that they know where it really goes. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we really try to avoid that there might be differences between the treatments with respect to overheads that they would not expect in the money treatment, that it's maybe used for overheads more than in the unit donation scheme.
Yeah, perfect. That answers it.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question.
Yes, I will unmute you, Maximilian.
Yeah, thank you. My question would be, so you have shown that with your design or you design your variation, you can influence the share of donors basically. But how many of these, let's say new donors donate such a minimal amount of perhaps $50 which they would not donate if they are transaction costs, which are not in your design basically. So can you give us a flavor of how many give these minimal amounts basically?
Yeah, right. So good call. There are not many transaction costs, although, you know, it was a very natural setting in which the MTurk worker encountered this donation page. It could be a way like any donation charity could implement something like this online. So also with a very low transaction cost. Here you see a histogram of the donation amounts, how they were distributed, and you know, you can also see why we think that in the large unit donations the share of donors decreased, while with the small units they decreased. What you see here is that in the pure money donation treatment, where people can give any amount they like, right? You have these local modes, which you would also expect, right? People, they think about when you give them $7, they think about, well, give I nothing, or do I give $1, $2, $3, something like this. But a bit surprising to us, people that have a very low willingness to donate, as you mention it, like how many only give a very little amount. There are not many who decide to give only 50 cents or anything like that. So if you change this, how much money do you want to give it? Or if you ask how much money do you want to give, many people seem to have in mind that giving below $1 is, and now I'm only speculating, maybe it's inappropriate or they just don't think about it. I don't know what's going on exactly, but they don't do it. This is what we see in the data. And then if you now rescale basically their choice set by asking them how many daily rations do you want to give? One ration costs you 50 cents. As soon as you do this, you see that this zero spike here drops compared to here, and those people seem to allocate in the 1 unit, which is 50 cents expenditure possibility. So it seems like that some people over here that give nothing, they have a low willingness to donate, but for some reason they don't express it. But if you offer them the possibility to give then only 1 unit that is below that first local mode in the distribution, now you give them a reason to actually express this. So you tease them from here to here, which actually increase the share of donors, while overall the money raised doesn't really change. So this is basically the trick that we think charities might be able to use to bring donors into the donor base by offering them appropriate units below the first local mode, because you will have those local modes in every campaign, right? Even if it's more appropriate to give like $100 or $200, you will have this first local mode probably with $10 or something like this. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Interesting point.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I think
you.
now we should let Viviana talk. Thank you for this presentation. So you can unmute yourself, Viviana, probably, or do we have to do it? No? Okay, ask to unmute.
She should be able to unmute herself.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Give me 1 second. I will share now my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Great.
Yes.
Great. So thank you very much, Johannes, for your nice presentation. And I will keep talking on charity and donation. And so let me start. I'm Viviana Urueña, and I will present our work on It Pays to Be Green, the role of persuasive communication to foster conservation. This is a joint work with Marcela Ibanez and Gerhard Pina. Oh, wait, it's not working. Okay. So as we know, many people in the poor countries live in the rural areas and therefore are quite dependent of natural resources. Because of this reason, we say that conservation is intertwined with social and economic development. This is why international organizations have incorporated the topic of conservation in the world agenda. For example, in 2019, the UN General Assembly declared the period of 2021 to 2030 as a decade of ecosystem restoration. The aim is to slow climate change, restore degraded ecosystems, but also to reduce poverty. What we know is that government and private organizations around the world have also committed to bring over 170 million hectares under restoration. Just to give you an idea what it is, it's about 5 times the size of Germany and about the size of Mexico. So initiatives supporting this, we have the Initiative 2020 that focuses on Latin America and the Caribbean, and we also have African 100. But then these initiatives do not work alone, and we as an individuals should all join forces. So we also have a role to play. But then the question is, how can people support these initiatives? So 2 quick ideas that are also related to the talk of Johannes is, well, people can go and plant trees themselves, but they can also donate to an organization that focuses on forest restoration and reforestation activities. However, we will be most focused on those people that actually donate their work, either by volunteering or by making crafts, in order to convince others to support these initiatives. So for example, in the photo, we see somebody in a shop talking with one person that came there and trying to convince to donate money for a charity. Or as you know, for example, UNICEF, you can donate in exchange of a card. So we also have these crafts here. Then the next question that we have is, how can we motivate these individuals to convince others to contribute? And this is what we will be focused on. So in a nutshell, what we did, we used a field experiment in which locals in Madagascar can donate their work by making handmade crafts to support a real fundraising campaign for reforestation. What we do is to vary the mode and frame of communication to persuade the people and thus elicit the support. And in addition, we also have 3 matching ratios that change, that increase, and that will allow us to identify different motivations for giving. So our paper will focus into 2 dimensions. The first one is persuasion, because here we have a sender that sends a message to a receiver with the aim to change the beliefs and the behavior of this receiver without the need of monetary compensation. What we discuss in our paper is that there are 2 main channels that help this persuasion to happen. The first one is guilt aversion. Why? Because there are many studies showing that we don't like disappointing others, right? So how we generate this guilt on people? We use in our messages 2 different modes. In one, we use warm messages, and in the other ones, we use messages that are very clear. So a characteristic of the warm message, or a representation of it, will be a story, narratives. So these stories what they do is reduce the distance between the sender and the receiver. And therefore, since I feel closer to the person telling me this message, then I will be less likely to let him or her down, right? However, narratives or stories are not so clear in the action that the sender expects from me. So if you think of a fable, it tells a story and you understand more or less what the person might want, but you are not so sure if what you should do next. On the other hand, we have very clear messages such as imperatives, commands. So in here, they tell you exactly what you should or what you should not do. So in here, we expect that if people are less willing to disappoint others because the message is very clear, then this will generate guilt on them, and therefore they will be likely to contribute to the fundraising. So we will be playing with these two modes of communication in our messages. In addition, our second channel is congruence. So as we know, there is theoretical and empirical evidence showing that for a receiver to act as the sender expects, then the sender should send a message that is congruent to the prior beliefs and values of the receiver, right? Here, what we do is framing the messages in two ways. So we have messages that have high congruence and all the messages that have low congruence. What we know from the psychology literature is that people are motivated to engage in pro-environmental behaviors when the messages make salient some egoistic values. So I want to take care of the environment because if I don't, it will harm me. And that's why we will include in this high frame or this high congruence frame, we make salient egoistic values, while in messages with low congruence, we will make salient non-egoistic values in which we say, okay, the motivations for the environment is because it's good for the nature or it's good for others. The second dimension that we look at is, we know from the work of Andreoni that individuals have different motives for giving. And what we do by using the 3 different matching ratios is that we can see this sensitivity of charitable giving when individuals are confronted to these different 3 ratios. And you will see this in a second, what I mean with this. So basically, we contribute to 3 different strands of literature. First, on the literature on persuasion, because we showed that the mode and frame of communication matter. And in particular, we explore these channels of guilt aversion and congruence. In addition, we add to the literature on charity because we provide evidence on charitable behavior with non-monetary contributions. As I said, the local population was donating the effort. And in addition, we also contribute to the literature looking at charity and altruism because we look at the effectiveness of matching mechanism, and we also explore the motivations for giving when this matching changes. So I will talk a bit now about where we conducted this experiment and also about our design. So we conducted this experiment in northeastern Madagascar. This is a very important spot for biodiversity, but also for economic activity. And because of man-made actions, we have observed in the last years rapid deforestation rates and biodiversity loss. After conducting different focus group discussions and also expert interviews, we came to the conclusion that it seems that conservationists are struggling to persuade the population. And why is that? Because how the conservationists are communicating with the people is rather in a way that they have to conserve the environment because otherwise the plants and the animals will be gone. And the people feel neglected. They feel that the NGOs do not care about their well-being. So what is happening? That the farmers are not adopting the practices that the NGOs are communicating. And therefore, these type of initiatives in this type of context are very important in order to reduce these communication mismatches. We run our experiment in 15 villages, and we selected the number of participants according to the size of the village. In total, we have 670 participants. And we also conducted these in villages that do not have forest reserves nearby, because we did not want to go to the villages that have a lot of contact with NGOs, but rather those that do not have contact, but that they still have important forest fragments in the territory. Once we were at the village, we did a random selection of households and also of participants. And okay, now our experimental design, it consists of 3 different stages. In the stage 1, we collected information of the participants on demographics, social capital perceptions and preferences. And in the second stage comes our intervention, in which the participants could listen to 1-minute audio. So they could listen 1 out of 5. We have 5 different messages, but they will listen only 1. In the first treatment, they will listen to this narrative, to this story, in which we make salient these egoistic values. So what is the story about? The story tells that different elements of nature gather. So the trees, the water, the air, the animals, they gather, and they talk about the environmental problems that are occurring. After this, they talk about the consequences if the people do not take any action. And here at this point is where we start making our egoistic values salient. Why? Because when we talk about or when we mention the consequences of no action, then they are framed in a way that the people know are on them. So for example, if no action is taken, then there will be less food to eat. If no action is taken, then the rice plantations will be flooded. If there is no action taken, then there will be no water to collect. So more or less, this is how the story goes. And this message ends by saying, when you do not take care of the environment, it is likely that one day you will not be able to profit from it and you will suffer the consequences. So here at the end is where we make this egoistic frame even more salient, so people, they can feel it more, so to say. In the second treatment, again, participants listen to the same or similar story, provides the same information, again, the different elements of nature and gather. But when we talk about the consequences of no action, then we frame it in a way that the consequences of no action will lie on everything but the self. So it will be on the animals, on the plants, on the environment, on other people, but not on themselves. And here we end this message by saying, when you do not take care of the environment, it is likely that one day it will disappear and the world will suffer the consequences. So here we try to put that the consequences will be in everything else but the self. The second mode that we explore is the clarity. And as I said before, then we use our imperatives. The imperatives basically communicate the same information that we give in the narratives. It's just that they are communicated differently. So they're basically on short sentences, but we kept the same information. Here, what we framed these consequences was more as commands. So do not cut the trees, or there will be no rain. Do not pollute the rivers, or there will be no water to collect, things like this. And at the end of these imperatives, we also add the 2 sentences that I read to you before, where we make salient this, more salient this egoistic value frame and this non-egoistic value frame. We also have a control group, and people in this group could listen again to 1-minute audio. And in this control, we tell the story, the history of the telephone. So it's not a topic related to the environment, but it just provides information when the telephone was created, by who, and how it's a bit the development since then. But it doesn't have a particularly frame or a mode. So it's not, we don't tell it as a story, so to say, just short sentences giving information. And something I want to tell here is the same person was recording the audio. So we have this kind of voice constant there. And the narratives, we did not create it ourselves. We listened to it when we were doing our focus group discussions. So that was a very special and nice moment when one of the farmers was telling this nice story, and everybody was clapping and very excited about it. So we just adapted for our design. And regarding the imperatives, we also took them from pamphlets that organizations like Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade sometimes gives to the population. So it was not completely external, these communication things, but it was more coming from the population there. So after the participants listened to the message, they had the opportunity to take a real effort task and contribute to the fundraising campaign. As I was saying before, the contributions that they could give are non-monetary. And basically, they have to decide between making blue or green bookmarks. They have to decide how many to make from a total of 12. However, these blue and green bookmarks are not different just because of a different color, but the sources of finance are also different. Why? Because for each blue bookmark that participant decides to make, then this person gets a fixed payment from us. However, for each green bookmark that they decide to make, then this bookmark will be matched with a monetary donation from Germany. So it will work as a gift exchange. What we did was making the participants to confront to 3 sequential decisions that are in the order I'm showing here. So in the first scenario, for each blue bookmark a participant decides to make, then he or she will get around €1. However, for each green bookmark the participant decides to make, then the NGO has the possibility to get €1. In the second scenario, we keep constant the amount that the person can get with the blue bookmark, but we increase the value that the NGO can earn. So you see here that the ratio is increasing. And again, in the third scenario, we still keep constant the amount that the person can get with the blue bookmark, but for each green bookmark that the participant decides to make, then the NGO can get 2 times the amount of the first scenario. So in case you are wondering how the bookmarks look like, this is how a completed bookmark looks. So it has a string, 3 bits on the top, and we also have a card sign with the name of the participants. So it says in Malagasy, regards from Madagascar. And we added this so people will believe in more that people in Germany will be likely to give money in exchange of this bookmark. So we did our best to make them very nice, and they were very happy to do it. And we provide participants with all the material, and also we taught them how to do it with an example, but it's very easy to make, as you see in the picture. In fact, participants took around 2 minutes to make each bookmark. And this was independent of the color. So if they decide to make blue or green, it requires the same effort. In addition, we calibrated incentives to the context, meaning if somebody wanted to do 12 blue bookmarks, then this is equivalent to 1 day of salary. So after telling all this, our hypothesis is, well, this was a bit difficult because there are no studies looking at the differences between narrative and imperative. So there are some studies on narratives, there are some studies on imperatives, but there are not studies comparing both. However, when we decided to take a stand, we believe that the treatment with the narrative and the egoistic message will be more effective in driving the individuals to contribute, because we believe that the guilt aversion channel will be stronger when we reduce the distance between the sender and the receiver. And well, the egoistic message, I told you before that there are already some studies showing the importance of making salient these egoistic values for environmental conservation. So this is our first hypothesis. And the second one is that we believe that an increase in the matching ratio will increase individuals' average contributions, basically because the public good is cheaper. So what we found, what we actually found is when we look at the extensive margin, we see that many people actually contribute. So in the control, we see 92% of participants are willing to make at least 1 green bookmark. And we see that this difference or this amount or this number of people willing to do something increases significantly in the imperative egoistic treatment. So we see an increase, and we see that this result holds even when we add controls. On the other hand, when we look at the intensive margin and we see how many green bookmarks people are willing to make, we see in the control group that on average they make 4.4. And again, this increases with our imperative egoistic treatment. It increased around 16% here. And again, these results hold when adding controls. Therefore, our first result that it's a bit at odds with our hypothesis is that actually the imperative message with egoistic frame is most effective. When we look at the results of what happens when you increase the matching ratio, we see Okay, actually the value collected increases. Yeah, of course, because the price of each green bookmark is increasing, but we do not see that increase goes at the same rate of the increase of the matching ratio. So actually what we see is that people are giving on average less. So you can see this is in the first scenario, second and third. And what we observe though is that there is no exchange on the extensive margin. So it's not that because of the matching, then people decide to give nothing. It's just that they decide to give on average less. However, we do observe different types of behavior. So we have individuals that do not change, so give the same amount on the 3 scenarios. There are participants also that increase, and there are also participants that decrease. And because of this, we say that increasing the matching ratio incompletely crowds out the giving behavior. And with this,
sorry, Viviana, just wanted to let you know that you have 4 minutes left, including questions.
Perfect. Oh, okay. Ooh, I will hurry. So when we look at the control, we see these different behaviors that I told you, and contrary to our expectations, then most of the people reduce their contribution. And when we can classify these individuals into the different motives for giving, then we see that in the control, 41% are warm blowers, meaning that they give the same independent of the price change. We also observe in pure altruistic individuals that are crowd in or crowd out their behavior because of the matching, changes in the matching. And when we see this, if our treatments, if our messages can change this distribution, we do not observe significantly changes in that. So just to conclude, imperative messages with an egoistic frame is the most effective in driving these contributions from the people, meaning that clarity and congruence of the message matters. We see that when the donation has the possibility to increase the positive externality, then participants contribute significantly less. And we do not observe a treatment difference in the distribution of the altruistic motives. And I want to end this talk by saying that a communication mismatch might be hindering the success of environmental campaigns, and therefore imperative messages that incorporate an egoistic frame seems to be a promising alternative. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if somebody has questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm curious if you saw any difference between genders in the effectiveness of the treatments.
No, we don't observe a change on gender. What we observe though is that when participants confront a female enumerator, then they are more likely to give. But this doesn't change if it's a female or a male. It's just if it's a female enumerator, then they're more likely to give.
I also have a question. So regarding the narrative, do you think that it would have changed if the narrative was better, or do you think that there's something maybe that applies to most narratives that they are not as strong enough as an imperative?
Yeah, well, I think I don't think the narrative was necessarily, I don't think the narrative was bad, because actually when we listened to it during this focus group discussion, the people there were really excited about it. Like I was also, it was a nice moment because they were like really touched by it. And that's why I also thought this could, generate more sensibility towards the topic. But it could be, people are used to, so when NGOs communicate with them, with these organizations such as Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance, communicate with the farmers, they always do it in a way of commands. Do this or don't do that, so could be that these people would be more, they kind of are used to it, and then they prefer this clear message that tells them what to do or what not to do. And this narrative is just nice, but it's not enough to make them actually to act on it.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. I mean, if you're convinced and you are that this narrative was a good one, I mean, I worry that some people might think, oh, but maybe it was not a good one, so we are not learning much about this. But if you think it is, I think it could be good to maybe complement this with some evidence that this is a good narrative, right? So imagine, for example, taking this narrative and taking some others that you find out there, and then making people rate them, and then you have some evidence to say, look, this is actually a good narrative. You don't have to just believe me. Like, I have here some evidence that this was a very good narrative among all the narratives that there can be, and still the imperative was more important. And then you're kind of maybe over this comment.
Yeah. So something I did. I mean, I did not do it like very, let's say, as a procedure when you ask people to rate it. But when I was designing the experiment and I was hiring my enumerators, we were a team of 10. I made them listen to the messages and they had to rate them. And they were very also excited with the narratives, and they were like, wow, where did you listen to this? It's so nice. And this gave me even more confidence than we were really capturing something really good. But yeah, I mean, the people also that were working with me, then they're from the urban areas, they're not outside. Yeah, so it was different, but it's a good idea to rate them. Yes, thanks.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm not sure we have time for more questions. I think we should go to the next presenter if it's fine. So let me check who's next. So it should be Julian. Are you wrong?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me share my screen. So I think you should be able to see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then, okay. Good, then let me start. So I'm going to present our work on COVID-19 and pro-sociality. So we focus on the effect of framing on charitable giving, and then also on the preferences for local causes. So this is a joint work with Maya Adener from the WZB here in Berlin. And so our motivation is, so you probably all during this pandemic heard stories about solidarity, such as that people shop for their vulnerable neighbors and so on, right? But there also might be other factors that might lower the solidarity. For example, if someone just lost their job, they just might not be able to donate anymore, right? So, or if people are blaming migrants, that might have also an effect on solidarity. So especially when it comes to whom to show solidarity with. And also the media played a role here. So COVID-19 was just so prominent in the media in the last month that the attention shifted away from more distant problems. So such as current problems as a plague of locusts in many African countries, and you name it. But how is framing used in charitable campaigns during COVID-19? So here I took a screenshot of Save the Children's Syria crisis appeal. Here on the left-hand side, you see the screenshot from March 2020, and you don't see any references to COVID-19 yet. But here on the right-hand side, this is a screenshot from May, there they replaced this text already, and here you see a very subtle change to the coronavirus. And we saw many charities using such a framing. So some have more subtle changes, some use this COVID-19 framing more prominently. But as you can see here in this example, they even use this framing for their long ongoing projects. I mean, Syria crisis appeal is a long ongoing project, right? They even change this and they use this framing of COVID-19. So let me come to our hypothesis. So first we hypothesize that this COVID-19 frame increases donation. And then in the second hypothesis, we think that people in more affected areas, for them the pandemic might be even more present than for others. So we hypothesize that these people will give more than individuals from less affected areas. But also here we think like, okay, because they have the pandemic more present, on the other hand, it might be that they just focus more on their own needs. And then in the third hypothesis, due to this shifted attention, we hypothesize that the national project will benefit more from a COVID-19 frame than an international project. And in a similar vein to hypothesis 2 and 3, we hypothesize that individuals from more affected areas will shift their giving to more local causes. But as you can see here in hypothesis 2 and 4, we actually don't rely, in these two hypotheses, we don't rely on the treatment variation, but we use the local severity of COVID-19, like in a natural experiment way. Because we know the locations of the participants, we can just use the numbers of COVID-19 cases in their areas. So there are also other studies that study charitable giving during COVID-19. So Banyas and Garza et al. 2020, they asked participants how much of €100 prize they want to keep for themselves and how much to donate, but they only find for the age group of 30 and older that these participants decreased their giving between the first 3 days of the experiment and the last 3 days. But here it's not really clear if the effect was related to the increased numbers of infections or economic consequences or other time differences. And Kienle et al., they focus on time discounting while we focus on framing. So we conducted an experiment. We pre-registered our experiment. We recruited more than 3,000 participants based in England. And these participants see a solicitation request from Save the Children. You will see that on the next slides. I will show you in more detail. But this solicitation request, there we vary the framing. So the treatment group sees a reference to COVID-19, while the control group doesn't see such reference. And then participants have to take 2 decisions. So they get an endowment of £1, and then they have to decide how much to keep for themselves and how much to donate. And then in the second step, they have to decide how much of their donation from the first decision should go to a local or a global cause. And yeah, let me jump to the screen that the participants see. Here on the top, in the blue box, we just took a standard text from Save the Children and that they can support their work. And below here, you see the decisions that people have to take. The slider in the middle, the participant can choose on the slider how much to keep for themselves. They can either keep all for themselves or donate all or choose any amount in the middle. Initially, they don't see any amounts here. So these boxes are, the amounts in the boxes are just left blank. So the treatment group sees almost the same screen except of this highlighted reference to COVID-19. Yeah, so they take basically the same decision, just with this small change. And the second decision, all participants see the same screen, and they need to decide how much of their donation, so this is a donation from the first screen, they want to donate to the local cause or to the global cause. Again, they can choose any amount and can give all to the local or to the global or any amount in between. But after these 2 decisions, we also ask the participants a few questions. So as I mentioned before, we ask for the area of residence, so that we later can use the number of COVID-19 cases in their area. But we also ask them if they are aware of how many COVID-19 cases are in their area, and if they think their area is affected more severely than other areas in the country. Plus, we ask them questions regarding their health. For example, we showed them the information sheet from the NHS that says, like, if you have certain health conditions, you belong to a high-risk group or to a moderate risk group. So, and then they need to answer if they belong to which group they belong to, or if they don't belong to a risk group. And then we also ask them about the economic situation, or if they expect changes in the economic situation, if they fear to lose their job, and so on. So let me come to our results. So this is the donation amounts that we see, and you clearly can see here focal points. So a lot of people donate the full amount of £1, and some others are just keeping the full amount of £1 for themselves. But we also see many people just splitting up 50-50. And also we see the focal points at 20 pence. And you see that 20 pence is way more popular than 21 pence, right? And let me come to our regression results. So our preliminary results show that people who saw this COVID-19 frame, they donate more. and it's also significant, and it also stays significant if we add more controls. Well, the dependent variable here was obviously the donation amount. So again, here for hypothesis 2, our dependent variable is the donation amount, but as you can see here in the first line, we don't find any evidence that supports our hypothesis 2. So individuals from more affected areas, we cannot show that they will give more. Our hypothesis 3 is now we actually have the dependent variable of the share of education to the local project. But neither here we can show that, yeah, we don't have any evidence for our hypothesis. And in our hypothesis 4, we don't find any evidence neither, where the dependent variable is also the share of donation to the UK. But for our hypothesis 2 and 4, we rely on the local severity, right? And we also, as I said, we asked the participants to estimate the numbers of cases in the area, but it seems that the participants are not very well aware of the actual number of cases. So that might be one of the problems. Or on the other hand, it just might be that the total numbers is just not a relevant factor for the decision. So we tried to use some other measures here, but the government changed the way of counting the COVID-19 deaths. And the most recent cases in the last 7 days was not very reliable neither, unfortunately. So, but yeah, we rely on this government data because it's only COVID-19 data that was available on a very local level. And that is what we actually need here for our hypothesis. So then I actually come already to our preliminary conclusion, so that the COVID-19 frame leads on average to a 3% higher donation. But we cannot show that the donation behavior of individuals from more affected areas actually differs. Neither can we show that the local projects benefit more from this COVID-19 frame. I think that's it for now, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I have a. Oh, you want to? Yeah, please shoot your question.
I may have missed this, but were participants notified that if they were to choose to donate, they could donate locally or globally, or did they only find that out after they chose to donate?
No, they only found out afterwards. Because our main question here was, so for our first hypothesis, our main question was yeah. So for our first hypothesis, the main question here was actually the COVID-19 frame. So, but later it was just revealed to them. So, but for the first hypothesis, it was important to know that they are not, yeah, thinking like, hey, I can donate to a local thing, so that would distort the results for the first hypothesis.
What was the original framing then? Was it just without framing, or did it say globally or locally, or was it just a general, you can donate?
No, the original framing was just saying like, hey, Save the Children is doing work, and well, it was also mentioned. It was also mentioned that they actually do work around the world and have a UK program, as you can see here. But yeah, so on the first screen, they actually they don't see that they have to take that they have to allocate it later. But it's mentioned that there's a UK program, and well, I mean this is just a standard text from Save the Children.
Very, very interesting. I also have one question, one maybe more technical question. So in the results, when you're controlling, you include as control the initial position of the slider, which yeah, Does it really make a lot of sense? So imagine that, for example, people already start putting the slider depending on where they want to donate, and people who are treated, put the slider already more to the right. Then you would be maybe kind of reducing the actual treatment effect. So your treatment effect would be larger, maybe, if you didn't control for this. Or did you check it out?
No, actually, we didn't remove it, but I mean, so to explain again here, so the people don't see any amount at the beginning, but the slider was not green before they clicked on it, so it was just gray and the slider. But to make them aware that they need to click it, we put the button on a random position for every slider, and that we did actually. So we used the random position because we see many focal points anyway, and we were thinking, like, if we keep the slider position at at the middle, we would see even more focal points here. So we tried actually that people use less focal points if we use a random position, but as you see, people still like focal points, even though we didn't put them in the middle or at the very left or the very right. People still like to choose these amounts.
I see. Then my question doesn't make sense. Then I thought that you meant the initial slider, that when they click, so that they click somewhere, and this is you count this the initial slider position. But no, if it's random, it's more than fine, of course.
No, and technically it was a bit difficult to make people aware that there's a slider that they can move, but don't show the slider before. So we actually had a slider with an initial random position to avoid this focal point effect. But as you see, people still like focal points. So, are there more?
Any question? Any other question? Okay, we're ahead of time already, and also my presentation will be also not very long, so we might be done earlier. So no one has any question. We have plenty of time. If you want to begin a discussion, it's more than fine as well. Okay, then should I proceed with my presentation then?
Yeah, you can go on.
Yeah. So let me share my screen. Oops. Now I have to learn with this new program which one is for the entire screen. Okay, there we go. Do you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So hi everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Campos Mercaden. I am a postdoc at the University of Copenhagen. And today I'm going to talk about whether people consider the externalities of their behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is a quite related topic to the one that Julian was talking about. But in this case, we are not studying donations, but we are rather studying the people's behavior during the pandemic and how pro-sociality might be related to this behavior. This is joint work together with Armando Meyer, with Florian Schneider, and with Eric Engström. Now, as we very much know by now, many behaviors during a pandemic affect others. So I, for example, create negative externalities on others if I do not respect social distancing or if I leave home when I am sick. Now, if people neglect these externalities, then there is a strong need for regulation, right? People are creating negative externalities on others. We need governments to come in and maybe to impose lockdowns and rules so that people cannot keep creating these negative externalities on others. However, if people already consider and take into account the externalities that they create for others, then sometimes it might be enough with recommendations. Actually, in the very hypothetical case in which people completely consider all the externalities that they create on others, then we would not need any governmental regulation at all, right? We would reach already the social optimal because people are already internalizing these externalities of their behavior. Now, as countries lift their initial restrictions, understanding whether people internalize the externalities that their behavior creates on others during the pandemic is key for policy making, as you can see. Now, what do we know? So do people consider others? We know actually that people consider others. There's a lot of research on social preferences showing that people are willing to give up some payoff in order to benefit others. What we do not know is actually whether these preferences, these social preferences, matter for health behaviors during a pandemic. It could be, for example, that during a pandemic, people are mostly afraid of getting infected, and their behavior is mainly driven by this being afraid of getting infected, and not that much by their consideration of how their behavior affects others. So now, as you could see coming, the main research question of this paper is, do people internalize the externalities that their behavior has on others during the COVID-19 pandemic? And how are we going to try to answer this? So let me just go briefly, just give you a brief idea about the design. What we did is we ran 2 surveys in Sweden last April. Okay, in one of them that we sent to 1,600 people, we measured their health behaviors, and we're going to talk more precisely about exactly what we measured. What we did then is this 2 weeks later, we measured from the same people, from 1,000 of the same people who answered this survey, their social preferences. And we measured their social preferences using experimental methods. So more concretely, we measured their willingness to expose others to risk for their own benefit with a kind of dictator game. We're going to talk more about it. And very importantly, the subjects didn't know that we were the same people. So they just answered one survey on health behavior, and then they just received another one 2 weeks later on social preferences. And we used actually different university affiliations and different formats. And the participants did not know that we were the same people and that we could actually match this data together. Okay. Importantly, this is sent to a representative sample of the Swedish population. And now, why Sweden? Why did we run it in Sweden? So mainly for 3 reasons. So first, as you know, as it's very much known, during the outbreak in Sweden, everything remained open. Restaurants, malls, shops, schools, workplace, everything was open. And then the Swedish health authorities were relying on people's behavior to control the pandemic and not on regulations. So basically we have a situation in which there are many cases. There were as many cases more or less as the UK and the US, in which it is very important to be responsible. It is very important to behave considering others, but in which people have the freedom to do it or not to do it. Right, so we have kind of the perfect mix in which it is very important, but at the same time, people have the freedom, and we will be able to study whether people with different characteristics actually follow more or less these recommendations. And then, while most people think that Sweden is a very pro-social country, actually it is not an outlier in this sense. It is not more pro-social than most Western countries like the US, the UK. Germany, France, Spain. It is quite similar in terms of pro-sociality. So we have a situation in which people are more or less as pro-social, but we have a huge pandemic outbreak, and they have freedom to do basically anything they want. So what do we do in the health behavior survey? So what we did is we measured 13 self-reported behaviors during the pandemic. So we had questions such as, I cough and sneeze into my elbow more now than before. If I am sick, I self-isolate. I use mask. I avoid social contacts. I try to keep distance with others, and so on. And we got these behaviors mostly from the recommendation from the health authorities. Now, what we did with these 13 self-reported behaviors, because we didn't want to have so many outcome variables, we put them in different health behaviors indices, right? So we created actually 4 health behaviors indices that just capture some of these measures. These indices were pre-registered, And we created them based on people's perceptions. So something I didn't tell you is that just on a sample of 100 people, actually in Prolific, we asked them to what extent they considered each of these behaviors something that protects yourself or something that protects others. So something that has large externalities or something that do not have that large externalities. And then we put them together, we create these indices depending on whether the groups actually had huge externalities or not that much. Now, on top of that, we also do not only have self-reported behavior, but also observed behavior. So in the survey, we allowed people to buy a cloth face mask. So they could choose between buying the face mask or getting $20 in cash. And we actually paid this to a subset of the participants. We also managed to see whether they seeked information. So at the end of the survey, when we said, thank you for participating, we said, if you want to know more about how to protect others and how to behave correctly during the pandemic, click these links. And then we just gave them some links. And then they didn't know that, but we managed to see whether they clicked in those links to get more information of how to protect others. And finally, we also have some donations to a COVID-19 fund, also incentivized. Now, this is for the health behavior survey, right? Where we see how people behave during the pandemic. Now, in the social preference survey that we sent 2 weeks later, we made 0 references to COVID-19. Okay, we just sent it, and it was a normal experiment in which people played some kind of a dictator game, but with risk. So what we wanted to measure here is somehow people's general willingness to put risk on others for their own benefit, right? So here we have the dictators and recipients started with $10 each, and then the dictator could decide how much risk he put on the recipient on the fact that the recipient loses $10. And the more risk that the dictator puts on the recipient, the more money the dictator gets, right? So this is more or less the choice that dictators could choose. So dictators could keep $10 and then put 0% risk on the recipient. So both would get $10. Dictator could also choose to put 20% risk on the recipient in exchange for some positive, for some $10 plus some money. And then this money went from 0.5 to $10. And this all the way until the final choice, in which dictators would get a lot of money and the recipient would for sure lose the $10, right? So we played this game with different X's, sometimes where it was very profitable to put risk on others, sometimes where it was not very profitable to put risk on others. And the idea was, once again, to try to have an individual measure of how averse each person is to putting risk on others for the own benefit. Okay, so then this measure, we just calculated with the average dictator choice. So on average, how much risk have you put on others? And then we have an individual measure for each person. Now, let me move to the results. So what do we find? First, in the social preference survey, what do we find? We find a strong aversion to put risk on others for own benefit. So remember that this is a representative sample in the Swedish population. This kind of experiments are not run much there, and it's important in itself to see whether people actually are willing to put risk on others because they don't care, because they want their own benefit to be higher or not. So what we see is that when there's a small benefit, then most people put 0% risk on others. While when there's a large benefit, still most people put 0% risk on others. There are some who start putting more risk on others, but still it was much more striking than we thought. So it was like people are very averse to putting risk on others. But of course, we found some people who were very averse, who always chose 0, and some people who actually, for some amounts, were willing to put more risk on others. So now that we have this measure for each person, we can check whether people who are more pro-social, more averse to putting risk on others, are also those who are behaving better, are also those who have better health behaviors. So this correlation between people's pro-sociality and their health behaviors, right? So what we see is that indeed there's a very strong correlation between pro-sociality, so how pro-social someone is in the experiment, how averse to bring risk on others the person is, and the person's behaviors. So when you see that this is positive, this means better behaviors, right? This means more responsible behaviors. And we see that this is true for all the indices, right? And if anything, while it's not very strong, if anything, for indices where the externalities are larger, so index 1, the externalities are larger than index 2, and index 3, and index 4, then we see that actually also this correlation is stronger for behaviors where the externalities are larger. Now, here what I'm showing you, so what I showed you is the pre-registered specification, which is the first one, which is basically the correlations controlling for age and gender, okay? And this is what we pre-registered. Here, what I'm showing you is other specifications where we basically include every single control that we can think of, okay? So we include sociodemographics, data and county fixed effects, risk and time preferences, beliefs, worries and health, big 5, and trust. And even if we control for pretty much everything, we still find very strong correlations between people's behaviors and their pro-sociality, their social preferences. All right. Now, how big are these correlations? So we wanted to study, so are these correlations very important? Do they determine a lot of people's behavior, or is it something that's not really very relevant? So what we thought to try to get closer to answering this question is, well, basically every single economic model would predict that risk aversion is very important when it comes to health behavior during a pandemic, right? So if I am infected, then I can have bad health reactions, I can become sick. So people who are more risk averse might be more likely to also stay at home. So what we will try to do is to get an idea of how important this pro-sociality is. We will compare it to a measure of risk aversion. So we had a measure of risk aversion, which is similar to Gnisi and Potter's, and which we gathered in a similar way to the pro-sociality one. And then we can check the correlations with the risk aversion and with the pro-sociality. And we see that while we also see that risk aversion explains some of these behaviors, still pro-sociality explains much more of the behavior. So the correlation between pro-sociality and health behavior is much larger than the correlation between risk aversion and health behaviors. Additionally, we wanted to see whether our results would hold with other measures of pro-sociality. So we also, in the survey, included the global preference survey measures, the self-reported pro-sociality, how much am I willing to give to charity? And we managed to see that actually, even with this measure, the correlations are very strong. If anything, they are even stronger than with our incentivized measure. On top of that, also something I didn't tell you, is that for a subset of this sample, for 400 people of this sample, we actually have a measure from 2018 of this global preference survey. So we have a measure of self-reported pro-sociality from 2018. So this allows us to study whether this pro-sociality is a long-term trait that actually already the pro-sociality from some years ago explain health behaviors nowadays. And it does, while the coefficients are more noisy, and because we have fewer people, we still see that people who are more pro-social 2 years ago are also those who are having better health behaviors nowadays. So it looks like people are indeed considering others with their health behaviors. It looks like people who are more pro-social, more averse to bring others at risk, are also those who are behaving better. Now, let me conclude. So people dislike putting risk on others. So we see this in a representative sample of the Swedish population. The aversion was very strong. This translates into the health domain. So there's a robust correlation between such pro-sociality and people's health behaviors during the pandemic. Now, this indicates that people internalize, at least to some extent, the externalities that their behavior has during the pandemic. Now, there are two main implications of this result. The first one is that models of disease spread actually typically assume selfish agents. So they assume that people, when they decide whether when they decide about their behavior during a pandemic, they mostly care about themselves. They think, am I gonna get infected if I do that? Am I not? And then they make their decisions based on that. What we see is that actually these models may be enriched quite a lot by incorporating pro-social motives, by incorporating agents who actually also worry about others and also care about others. And the predictions might be very different. This is not only important academically, like for these models academically, but also policymakers are making their decisions on lockdowns and regulations based on the predictions of these models. So updating these models and including this dimension might actually end up changing the policy that we see. Secondly, there exists also substantial heterogeneity in prosociality across regions. So there's a lot of research showing that actually different countries, different regions within countries, different cities have different levels of prosociality. This is something that we also see with our data. Now, our research implies that actually governments could adapt the way in which they lift restrictions with the degree of prosociality in the population. So if you imagine a city in which people, for some reason, are very prosocial, they care a lot about each other, and then another city in which people are not, even if both have the same number of COVID cases, maybe in the first one, we can relax the restrictions much earlier than in the second one, because in the first one, we already have people helping and considering others, and therefore the regulations do not need to be as strong as in the second one, in which people are actually not considering others. And that is all for my part. Thank you all. So there's a question in the chat. Yes, Egon. So this is I mean, there have been already plenty of papers in which they include social preferences with risk. We're definitely not the first ones to mix these concepts. But yes, this version of the dictator game, it might be that someone has done it before, but we came up with it. It was just we were just aiming at the simplest version of an economic game in which people could put risk on others for own benefit, which was kind of what we wanted to capture, this aversion or willingness to putting risk on others for own benefit, to capture the kind of social preference that might be playing a role throughout the pandemic. Yes, Margaret wants to ask a question. Ask to unmute.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah, really nice to see your presentation. So I was just wondering if this is also something to do with the fact that the government has kind of left the responsibility of making good health behaviors on the part of the population, so that, you know, if the population actually faces a lot of regulations and lockdown, maybe their prosociality doesn't translate as much to health behaviors. Have you thought of this?
That's a super yeah, nice insight. I mean, it could be actually that if there are only regulations and not that much recommendations, that you maybe infantilize the people and you just say you have to do that and there's nothing you can do. Maybe prosociality then doesn't play a role, but probably because also you cannot choose that much. But I think it's a very interesting empirical question, you know, about whether these correlations are larger in Sweden, for example, than in Denmark. So other similar countries in which they have had strong enforcements. Still, I would expect the correlations to be there. Maybe, I don't know if they would be that strong, but I would expect them to be there, because still there's this, in most countries, restrictions have been also matched with recommendations, right? And more strong than some recommendations are stronger than others. Like you're not supposed to leave home when you're sick, kind of that's very bad. And I think that people who actually care about others in whatever country they will really take this into account. But yeah, sure, this is a very interesting empirical question. It could be different. I'm not sure if it would get to zero, but the correlation could be different in other countries in which the regulations have been stronger.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, Viviana, I think you're trying to talk, but I cannot hear you. No?
Can you hear me now?
No, perfect.
Great. Yeah, thank you for this nice presentation. And I have two questions or comments. Yeah, the first one is, okay, you're saying that, so usually what we know is that people in the North, in North European countries are rather more pro-social on average than in other countries, right? Mm-hmm. However, and you're able to show, okay, actually these social preferences are connected to the health behavior. So it is positive, meaning that we would expect that these people in the North, like in Sweden, will be more likely to internalize these negative externalities of their actions. However, we still observe that the number of cases in Sweden are as large as in countries that US and UK. So what is it like? Okay, maybe in the dictator game, they don't want to put the risk on the people, right? Because maybe now we are all in the frame like, oh, risk, we're all under risk. So no, why should I transmit it to others? But I'm not sure if this prosociality is really there, or if maybe it's not big enough, because your last sentence was saying, okay, maybe governments should adapt the regulations based on this prosociality of people. And then when you say that, I think, well, if in Sweden, this prosociality is not large enough, and we know that it's one of the largest, then how much else is needed?
I must say, so first, just prosociality is not much larger in Sweden than in other countries. We have this idea, but then when you look at actual research, it's not very different. But I don't want to make the case that the Sweden approach is the right approach. I mean, it has been a catastrophe in many ways. So what I'm making the case so I mean, the Swedish approach has been basically to have zero regulation. Like in Sweden, there has been no pandemic at all. I live here, and like really, like everything has kept. Just some stickers in the floor have appeared, and that's everything that's saying hold your distance. But that's everything that has changed. So maybe this is too extreme. But what I'm saying is that so maybe prosociality is not enough to stop the virus completely. Actually, the virus is relatively stopped now, but maybe prosociality is not enough to stop the virus. But maybe we can play at the same time with prosociality and with lockdowns. The thing is that in these models, if you don't consider that people consider others, then you've all seen all these models that that show that the curve of the pandemic is just going up super steep, and basically everybody will die. But then in the end, this is not what happened. For example, in Sweden, this is not what happened in most places where they had a bit less regulations. And then our point is that maybe these models are somehow not taking into account this fact that people also care about others, and people, if they are sick, they will really not leave home because they realize that this is very bad, and they give some weight to that. So according to these models, if you're infected, you know that you cannot get infected again, then you will leave home because you will go to restaurants and stuff because you really don't care. You cannot be infected again. And our point is, well, maybe this is an important dimension that we should be taking into account. Maybe not the only one, maybe not relying entirely on this, where we don't take a stance on this, but maybe it's just something that we can at the same time use.
Okay, and the second question I had is just a clarification. When you did this dictator game and then you changed the amount, so this X, was it as a strategy method, or it was just each participant with a different?
No, exactly. So let's see if I can go back. Yeah. So it was not the strategy method. They could just they had 6 choices, and they faced 5 times. So they played the game 5 times with different coefficients within different parameters. So you start with playing the game with 0.5, and then you choose how much risk you put in the other. You then play the game with 1, and then you decide how much risk you put in the other.
Okay.
Then you play okay. So each dictator made, I should have been more clear on that, 5 choices. and they, in each of the choices, they decide 6 alternatives.
Okay.
So basically the general aversion that we try to capture with each person is just the average risk that you put on others. Across your 5 choices, how much risk on average did you put on others? So you maybe put 20 and I put maybe 30.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so let me lower my hand first. Okay. So thank you. I really enjoyed this presentation. One thing I was thinking is that it seems to me that you push a lot the role of social preferences, which is something that I sympathize with. I'm sure like this matter here. I wonder if in this bin you would put also things like people following social norms, because in a way, I mean, if not, then I would challenge your one of your conclusions, right? Because I mean, yeah, we know that this kind of behavior can explain dictator giving, and we know that there's lots of peer punishment in the population if you don't wear a mask or if you don't wash your hands, right? So following norms seems important also.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We're not taking a stance here on why our people are averse to putting risk on others, right?
But,
so we're not. So what I mean is that this can at the same time have norms and caring for others and all the reasons why people do not want to put risk on others. So we're maybe understanding social preferences are just everything that can be warm glow, altruism, social norms, image concerns, whatever.
But people can be completely selfish here, right? I mean, they could be completely selfish, being afraid of what happens to them if they deviate from the norm, and you could still observe these correlations. That's my point.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I would, maybe it's a matter of definitions. I would not call them selfish if they actually give money to the other, even if it's for social preferences. I would just call them, okay, they are maybe not altruists, but they are not selfish in that if they were selfish, they would keep everything for themselves. But but regardless of what definition we use, I completely agree that norms can play a huge role. That there are many reasons why people would not put risk on others, and we're not taking a stance into which one it is. And I think it's interesting in itself, maybe to keep researching on this and to understand, okay, which ones are the ones playing a role here? Is it altruism, warm glow, social warm glow, norm following? This we're not getting into. I think it's a very good point to distinguish them.
Thanks.
Is there anybody else who has a question? Thank you so much for these questions and these comments. They're very useful.